has all the respect gone? I sure can't find it. I'm Dan Perkins.
William Jennings Bryan and Hillary Clinton. They're more alike than we think, and the nation can't afford them. I'm Don Mazzella.
Time for Two Guys from Verona. Each week, you will hear from Dan Perkins, a financial expert, a regular columnist for the Hill website, and best-selling author, and Don Mazzella, a veteran journalist, author, and radio host talking about things that concern you politically, financially, and socially. They will also try to give listeners a heads up on future happenings. We start off each program with Dan Perkins' essay on what he considers an important issue facing us.
Well, we're going to talk about respect. And I'm reminded of the old Aretha Franklin song about respect. But I think that we've got a problem in our country today, that there's a ever-increasing lack of respect for almost everything. There's a lack of respect for the law, for the Constitution, for police, for the rights of other people. I was struck last weekend when I saw the continuation of the protest, I guess is one way to say it, during Mr. Trump's meetings, his speeches. And one thing that struck me was there was a video where the street was lined with young people, probably 10, 12 years of age, in their sombreros and their Mexican flag, and using very filthy profanity and using their middle finger to salute people who were driving by in cars. They were also burning the American flag while carrying the Mexican flag around their shoulders. We've seen protesters on Friday night who were jumping on police cars and were crashing the windows and throwing rocks and bottles and stones at the police because I think they have no respect for authority, which means they have very little respect for themselves. I look at what's going on and I wonder, we've been talking for weeks now during the campaigns about the level of rhetoric and the abusive nature of the language of the rhetoric in the presidential primaries on both sides. The presidential debate in Brooklyn for the Democrats was the most brutal, unkind, unsensitive, uncivil, I guess is the right word, discussion between the two of them. The moderator basically had to say to them, if you don't shut up, nobody's going to be able to hear what you're saying. People talking on top of other people. And what I saw in the Democratic debate, what I saw in the protests in the street, in the cars, and as I looked around the country, it's a fundamental lack of respect for the human being. And the idea that if we are truly going to be a free and open society, then we have to have the ability to freely, objectively, unemotionally discuss issues. And realizing that sometimes those issues may be at conflict with the way somebody else is thinking, we do have the right to share our opinion without being attacked, criticized, maligned, and physically hurt. So I don't know where it began. I don't like where it's going. And it seems to get more and more difficult. There are some reporters who are saying that the protests last weekend were run by the various MoveOn.org and Black Lives Matter and all those other organizations working together. But what I did think was kind of funny is Trump was talking about how he had to get out of the one particular arena, and he said he felt like he was trying to cross the border. So he had some idea what it was like. But I look at what's going on, and I see what happened at the correspondence dinner over the weekend, Don, when one of the black men referred to, in essence, the president as his nigger. And there was some outrage that he was using it, even though it was said that, and this is kind of an interesting twist, ethnic groups can criticize other members of their ethnic group by using whatever derogatory statement they want. It's when it crosses over the line from one ethnic group to another is when it becomes racial or bigoted or whatever. I don't agree with that. I think it's racial and it's bigoted, even if it's used against black people. I remember Richard Pryor, a wonderful, highly talented comedian, who seemed to use the N-word consistently, and people would laugh at it, and he would entertain people in his abuse of the language. But we've gone to another area, another level of, let's call it, for lack of a better description, Don, danger. People are going to start to be killed if something isn't done about the ability of a person to have the right to speak their mind. Any thoughts, sir?
Well, I always have a lot of thoughts once you open up these monologues. It's interesting. Civil disobedience has been a part of America since its beginnings. No question. In the 60s, the civil disobedience led to the revolution in race relations. And as someone said to me over the weekend, he was nostalgic for those days. I don't know why. I go back to the time I was a copy boy. I was sent down to Mississippi to retrieve some film that was highly controversial at the time that we put on Huntley Brinkley. But you're right that this respect has permeated our society. But it begins, I think, with our politicians. Some people say it begins at home, but we won't even go there. But our politicians and our media are not condemning it. I have not seen, and it might be there, but I haven't found it, any condemnation of what happened to Donald Trump out there in California, what's happened in various other places. It's a shame because we need to respect each other. There was a time, and this is obscure, when men took off their hats when women came into the elevator. When people stopped and took off their hats or put their hands across their chest when a funeral went by. These are the little things that make up a civilized society. We're not seeing that today. All we're seeing is people running. My question when I saw the footage in California is, why weren't those kids in school? Why weren't those women either at home or working? Why are they not doing any of these things? It's a shame, and everything you're saying is true. But until this nation faces this reality and deals with it, we're in trouble. I'm back to you, Dan.
Well, your thought struck another thought with me, and it's something I feel like a broken record. But if you understand that what we may be seeing is a result of political correctness, number one, and number two, a lack of assimilation into the American culture by immigrants who've come here either legally or illegally. My guess is, and it's only a guess, is that most of the people who were lining the streets protesting people going to the Trump rally, good chance they were illegals who came into the country. Because those people who respected our law to come into the country legally wouldn't be standing on the line. They wouldn't be burning the American flag, and they wouldn't be draping themselves around the Mexican flag. So I think it's another example of political correctness gone bad. And when parents don't accept their responsibility for the children that they bring into the world, of teaching them right and wrong, when people don't understand our laws and decide they're not going to follow them, whether they be politicians or they be the average person on the street, it's a real problem. We need to take a break. We'll be right back. This is Dan Perkins and Don Mazzillo for Two Guys from Verona.
Welcome back. You're listening to Two Guys from Verona. Once again, here's your hosts, Dan Perkins and Don Mazzillo.
Dan, I want to talk about something that occurred to me this morning when I was doing some other research. Most of our audience probably don't know a lot about William Jennings Bryan. He was a late 19th, early 20th century political gadfly, fundamentalist, a very interesting man. He at the 1896 Democratic Convention, he did a speech in which he said, "Mankind should not be crucified upon a cross of gold." It propelled him to the nomination, but it didn't get him the presidency. Years later, he became Secretary of State under Woodrow Wilson. He spent 4 years on a generally lackluster Secretary of State, while Woodrow Wilson did his own foreign policy. Does that sound familiar? We're talking this a little bit. And then in 1926, he defended Tennessee law in the famous Scopes trial, in which the state of Tennessee tried to outlaw teachers talking about evolution, rather that they had to teach that the earth and the sky and everything else was created in 7 days. Well, he won that particular trial. Scopes eventually went to jail, paid a fine, but he lost in the long run. Now we have today Hillary Clinton and her cohorts in the Democratic Party are trying to convince people that somehow or other it's seditious and illegal to doubt whether there's global warming. I really sit here, and to quote Hillary Clinton, what difference does it make? It makes a hell of a lot of difference that we're trying to stifle scientific thought. They try to do it with Galileo in the 15th century. They're trying to do it now. And there's still doubt of whether we have global warming or, as you're going to correct me, climate change or whatever else. Well, God knows this country's been going through a change. I just found the picture Sunday of me in the 1947 snowstorm that blanketed New York City. At that time, it was an amazing event, and people still talked about it 30 years later. Well, the world is changing, and weather is always changing. What did Mark Twain say? Be patient. If you don't like it, wait a day and it'll change. Well, the world is changing, and we should question everything about weather, about global warming, about anything else. But William Jennings Bryan tried to hold back evolution and thought. Hillary Clinton and her cohorts are trying to do the same. I think Bryan failed, and I think she will. Your thoughts, Dan?
Wow, that's a heavy piece you laid out there. I really think that the most recent number I saw was that the United States was spending about $350 billion a year on trying to deal with global warming. President Obama told us in 2008, told the coal industry and the electrical utility industry, you can try and build a coal plant, but we're going to bankrupt you because there's not going to be any more coal plants built in the United States. And last week, Peabody, one of the oldest names in coal and energy, filed for bankruptcy because they can't make any money trying to comply with the Department of Environmental Protection and their restrictions because of coal. But again, it's an example of something similar to what I said in my opening session, and that is that they're trying to control thought. And if you don't agree with them, then you have to be destroyed. You have to have protests. You have to have people questioning your loyalty, your honesty. I think there are 22 attorney generals in the United States who are thinking about the possibility of asking the Congresses or the Senate and the state legislatures to introduce legislation that would make it a law, a criminal offense to speak out against climate change. Now, I said to you when we spoke earlier, they started off talking about global warming, just like they started talking about 47 million people that don't have health insurance. And they changed the rhetoric to 47 million people don't have health care. they don't have health insurance. So they switched it from being health insurance to health care, and they lied to the American people. The same thing's true about global warming. Global warming, the last study I saw, Don, is that 92% of the American people don't believe the government that there is even a problem with global warming. So what did they do? They changed it from global warming to climate change. Everything is climate change. Everything is now blamed on climate change. I saw a report recently where they said that climate change affects a woman's period. Maybe it does, but as you said, climate change has been around from the beginning of time. I think your analogy of Bryant and Hillary is a good one, because what she stands for in her campaign on the left is the government should make the decisions for everybody. We are not capable. And what we're seeing is that a revolution taking place with Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, where the American people, the mainstream of American people, have reached a point where they've had enough of the government telling them they know better than they do, and they're going to make the decisions for them. I mentioned to you this afternoon that in the first 6 months since the president signed the omnibus tax bill, the national debt is up $1 trillion. Now, you had a great line about the national debt and $1 trillion and finding jobs. We'd much rather pay interest than to help people get paid to do work. $1 trillion in 6 months is an astronomical amount of money. Again, a matter of the elites trying to tell us what we have to believe and what we can do. And I think the William Jennings Bryan illustration in comparing Hillary is a brilliant comparison, because I believe she is out on the deep end somewhere. You know, it's interesting. They talk about Bernie Sanders being the first true communist to run for president in the United States. And they talk about Hillary being to the left. And yet anybody who reports about what's going on with the riots and the protests says the left. Yet we don't hear anybody on the left politically saying anything about the riots and what's going on. They just leave it alone, and they take no ownership of it. Don?
I want a quote from Pericles' oration to the funeral oration to the dead at Marathon, which essentially says, "The secret of happiness is freedom, and the secret of freedom is courage." And right now, our politicians are not exhibiting many courageous lines. I know you feel it's about political correctness. I feel it's more about how they simply do not have the courage to say they follow the trend rather than what is best for the country. And right now we are suffering from that to an extent that we haven't even begun to see how much it's going to hurt us in the coming months and years. Interesting point. There was a story leaked, and I use that in quotes, to the press about how Hillary Clinton opposed in the beginning the Iranian treaty, and how she thought that the Secretary of State Kerry was a loose cannon. All of these things point to me to the fact that our politicians do not know what's best for us or for them, but rather simply follow what's expedient. Right now, I think Hillary Clinton is doing that. As you know, I feel very strongly that Vice President Biden is poised to swoop in to take the nomination. I still believe that may happen. I'm less sanguine today than I was yesterday, but I'm more sanguine about it. Back to you, Dan.
Well, you know, we've got just about a minute. In thinking about what you're talking about with leadership, When you're spending other people's money and you're making decisions based on other people's money, whether it's policy or budgets, and you're not putting your money in play, people are being taken care of by their wealth, but the middle class is being destroyed by all of these programs that are being funded by deficits. So we need to take another break. We'll be right back. This is Dan Perkins and Don Mazzillo for Two Guys from Verona, and we'll be right back.
Welcome back. You're listening to Two Guys from Verona. Once again, here's your hosts, Dan Perkins and Don Mazzella.
Well, Don reminded me during the break of a quote I came up with when we talked this afternoon, and I thought we'd missed the opportunity to use it, but son of a gun, here we are. And the quote was that the government is more ready to add debt than they are to add jobs. Job creations is what makes this economy viable. From about the 1870s to the 1920s, we had over 40 million immigrants who came into this country who wanted to become American citizens, wanted to leave wherever they were, and came and worked hard, became citizens, followed the rules, and created jobs and formed businesses and made more jobs. But what we have is a situation where now almost 50% of the people in this country depend upon the other 50% of the country. Now, I said to Don this afternoon, I saw a statistic that said, scary statistic, 1 out of every 5 households in the United States has nobody employed. 20% of the households of the United States have nobody employed. That's an incredible number. We have in excess of 94 million people who have exhausted all of their unemployment benefits, and even though they don't have a job, for the purposes of calculating the unemployment rate, are on the unemployment rolls. I think that the government has lost touch to just how bad it still is out there in the economy. That's not just middle class, it's a lot of different classes are not making what they used to be making. As somebody said, maybe it was Hillary, what America needs a raise. America hasn't had a raise in 8 years. Maybe that's because of the president, Mr. Obama, who is more interested in social programs than trying to put and making people more dependent by the government and on the government, as opposed to trying to find ways to encourage businesses to put people to work. We have, best estimate, Don, over $2 trillion of corporate profits that are held overseas because with an anemic economy, corporations cannot put money to work and earn a reasonable return when they look at the tax rate that they have to pay for whatever they earn. So those earnings that are overseas are staying overseas. If we had a revision in the corporate tax rate to a lower level, we could see repatriation of some of that $2+ trillion, which might have an opportunity for the private sector to create jobs. Creating jobs increases revenue. More revenue puts more people to work, more demand. But we don't have a government who doesn't want to put people to work. We have a government who wants to take care of people. Mrs. Clinton wants to take care of you from cradle to grave if she wants you to get out of the womb. And she may not want you out of the womb because there's too many people. I saw, going back to your global warming thing, Don, I heard this story today, true story, about a Harvard professor who is studying how to shrink human beings, make them smaller. Because if we can make them smaller, they can lower their carbon footprint, and so there's less demand for energy and food, and we can have a better world. We have a government is sponsoring research to make Americans and people all over the world smaller. I've heard people say, as it relates to global warming, we should not be sending foreign aid to Africa. We should let the natural forces take over and reduce the population because it's too overpopulated. These are absolute decisions that are life and death decisions that people are making almost flippantly without really considering what are the ramifications. I want to believe, and maybe I'm Pollyannish, Don, I want to believe that there are still millions and millions of people in this country who, instead of being on welfare, would like to have a job, a paycheck, and take care of themselves and take care of their families. But we have a government who doesn't want to do that.
Dan, let me interrupt you. You know, you're right about this. Interesting you said about shrinking humans. Do you know that every war that America has fought since the Revolutionary War, each successive war has shown that the average shoe size has grown and expanded, and that in fact today we haven't had a real war in about 10 years. We've had the shoe size is up from the Gulf War, and that our average height is up. So it's interesting. If we want to shrink Americans, we've got to stop feeding them, which was another topic we could talk about.
Right.
But I wanted to talk to you. America has always grown on small business. Small businesses have become large businesses and the large corporations, but they've always begun as small enterprises. And we don't have that today. And a study that came across my desk yesterday, which I put up on my website on Small Business Digest, a majority, 67% of the people polled, small business leaders, said they were pessimistic about the economy and the future of America. That's a strong number. Along with that, another survey showed that a majority, 56%, were planning not to add people for the rest of the year, employees. That's another scary statistic. And then I'm just going to give you one more because it supports everything you're saying. A friend of mine is one of the most busiest consultants in his particular area, and he's been in business for 40 years. Today, in his office, he did not receive a single phone call, not one phone call, and just 15 emails. Now you could say, you can say, well, maybe he's on the downward curve. He's not. It's just that the world is changing. And whether Washington wants to admit it or not, America is hurting, and the American people are hurting, and they're not. All they can think about is giving them additional doles. Back to you.
Yeah, and, following that logic, look at the number of retailers who have gone out of business. Look at the number of shopping centers that are closing because the big box stores can't compete with the Amazons online. Our culture is changing. We don't necessarily get in our cars and drive to the mall in the same quantities that we used to before. And more of what we do is being driven by the internet. That takes jobs. You and I talked several weeks ago about McDonald's, and I was in Orlando a couple of weeks ago for a week, and they had one of the new McDonald's restaurants, which is you order by kiosk. You don't go to a counter, and somebody brings you your food. It had only been up in a few days, and they were having a lot of problems with it, but they're going to get better. And even we had a discussion about 7-Eleven some time ago about how they've changed their process of eliminating cash register jobs and people behind the counter. They're finding more efficient ways in which to service their customers and control their costs. And
can I interrupt you right there?
Sure.
I was talking to one of the top consultants who's doing such a program for a major franchise operation like McDonald's. I won't say which one. Mm-hmm. And he says the best thing that happened to his business was the $15 demand for $15 an hour, because with the kiosk and everything, 3 out of every 10 employees will be eliminated in the average establishment over the next 5 years. 3 out of 10. That's 30% will be eliminated. And you know who's going to be hurt the worst? The lowest class, because they're the starting point.
Right.
And I just wanted to bring that in because I think it's so important. The unintended consequences of quote good acts.
Well, you know, that's we haven't talked much about this, but I think it's one of the biggest problems that we have in politics today and in government and for that matter, in business, that we do not take the time to think about the unintended consequences of our actions. Let me give you an example. I was out to dinner with my wife tonight before the show, and I asked her if she'd heard about what had happened, I think, in Texas and California. As you know, when the controversy came about what sign goes on the door in the bathroom, Target was one of the first companies to comply with whatever you want, wherever you want to go. And there were 2 reports today of 2 women who were threatened by men who came into the unisex bathroom to the point that they ran out of the store. Now, anybody who had any logic in their brain looking at this, go wherever you want to go, had to begin to think about, or should have begun to think about, the ramifications, the consequences of that decision. Did we put women at risk? Did we put children at risk? I believe we have. But again, it's a matter of the LBGT, politically correct society, breaking the barriers down. Well, you know what? I think when it comes to the bathrooms, there need to be barriers. And I have great fear that what's going to happen here is somebody's going to be hurt, raped, or murdered, a child or a woman, in a Target bathroom, and they're going to wind up being sued, and then the pendulum's going to swing back and people are going to start wondering, did they do the right thing? I think it's when people die because of the, quote, unintended consequences. See, to me, unintended consequences means that the people who made the decision didn't think it all the way through. They didn't ask the question, what are the consequences of our action as individuals or as a corporation?
Dan, let me address that issue. Funny, you know, of course, that at most sports venues, stadiums, etc., there's been a trend to doubling the number of women's bathrooms to men's bathrooms.
Right.
Well, there's still several stadiums where the numbers are equal. Now, what's going to happen this football season when women come in and decide they're going to crash the men's bathrooms with all these hyped up sports guys? You know, that's going to be the interesting thing. And I brought that up recently. But I can just give you a personal experience. In New York City, about 25 years ago, they started permitting unisex bathrooms long before the rest of the nation. And I can tell you one of the most embarrassing moments of my life was the first time I used a unisex bathroom without realizing it. Because it's taken 25 years, and there are still, in New York City, incidences where things happen like that. Maybe we're too old, maybe we're too old, maybe we're just too set in our ways, but I still prefer to use a men's bathroom for whatever has to be done.
Right. Well, we need to take another break. This is Dan Perkins.
I'm Don Mazzella.
We'll be right back with 2 guys from Verona. Stay tuned.
In this final segment, Don and Dan offer their predictions on what's going to happen in our world.
Well, Don, we know since we're doing this live that the most of the major networks have called the winner for Indiana of Mr. Trump somewhere between 7 and 9% percentage points. Huge reversal from where it was just a week ago. Seemed to be a lot of adverse reaction to the alliance with Kasich, and Kasich pulling out of the state and going into letting Cruz go 1-1 against Trump. I haven't seen the vote total, so I can't deal with that. But I do want to make a point, is that the Cruz supporters were counting the wrong things. Donald Trump probably is going to wind up with enough delegates to get to the first ballot. And I don't know that if Cruz would have won Iowa or Indiana tonight that would make any difference. But one of the things that's important is, in order to beat Hillary in the fall, if she's going to be the candidate, and I know you still think she's not going to be, but if she is, or in order to beat Uncle Joe and Pocahontas, a Republican's going to have to take some Democratic states. And I looked at the votes, and I looked at what happened. And a huge percentage of the total Electoral College votes are in the 10 largest states in the United States. What Cruz wasn't talking about, and none of his people were talking about, and I understand why, but eventually it was going to come down to, if Trump didn't get it on the first ballot, Trump was going to be, and his people were going to be working the floor, much like Lincoln's operative did at the Wigwam in Chicago when he ran for president, the presidential nomination of the Republican Party. Of the 10 largest states in the country that had the greatest number of electoral votes, Ted Cruz won 1, and it looks like Donald Trump is going to win 9. So you can talk about all you want about winning on the second ballot, but if you come in third in New York, and I understand he is down, Cruz is down as much as 22 points in California, there's no chance for him to beat Hillary, because if he can't win in a blue state, there's no way he's going to beat her. Don?
Well, I agree with you there. What surprised me, we're talking politics, and I'll stick with it for a minute, was that in a recent poll that was headlined in the New York Post and several other places, Trump beat Hillary Clinton nationwide. And it is very possible. It's very interesting. His early comments about women, if Donald Trump learned to keep his mouth shut about women, people will forget it. I think they will forget it much more quickly than they will if Hillary Clinton is indicted, or if she's not indicted. The very interesting thing, and something just came across my desk that really got me to thinking and about this whole thing. She's in between a rock and a hard place. If she doesn't get indicted, it's about her emails and about her foundation. People will always wonder, was there truth? If she is indicted, they'll say she won't get a fair hearing to get a resolution before the election. So people will say, what happened? Either way, she's in a very bad position. There was a new book that came across my desk. The election, that says the presidential election essentially comes down to 4 liars. Who do you choose? And I'm sitting here saying, where has this nation gone to that we have these choices? And I believe that, very strongly that God takes care of the republic, and that at the end of the day, the republic will stand. And I don't think the people we're talking about will be our presidential candidates. I hope I'm right, not to be right, but because I believe the nation needs good, strong leaders who somehow or other can lead us out of this morass that you so ably keep pointing out and make me depressed sometime at the end of our talks.
Yeah.
Back to you, Dan.
Thank you. I look at it and I say to myself, if you look at the way the press treated most of the Republicans, there was this debate last night on Hannity and O'Reilly, and that we're discussing. Did the press make Trump, or did the press try and destroy Trump? And interestingly enough, the answer was yes and yes.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
yes. They made
Absolutely.
Trump by giving him the time because he was news, and they follow news. And they
Can I interrupt you here, Dan?
Sure.
From a very important point. Also, Donald Trump understood he was the only candidate that went on television continually. If the Des Moines, Iowa station asked for him, he was there. He was smart enough to recognize that he could make up for the millions of dollars in the organization by being out there. I didn't give him enough credit for this, but in talking on Friday to a major radio television executive, he said, we made the mistake. And you know who benefited the most? CNN, because they really used Trump to the greatest extent. At the same time, they did everything in their power to destroy him. In the end, he made them and made himself.
Yeah. One of the things, we only got about a minute, but one of the things I want to ask you about, this idea that they made him but they destroyed him. If Hillary is not the candidate and we're bringing in an Uncle Joe and Pocahontas, the Republican Party doesn't have anything of significance spoken by either one of those people over the last year. Hillary,
Deliberately so.
Hillary, they got all kinds of stuff that they can use for campaign ads, but they don't have it with Uncle Joe and Pocahontas. So are you saying that Hillary is so damaged that they're going to have to replace her because the rhetoric is so bad?
Well, that's how I felt for a long time. You cannot last as long as Hillary Clinton has without doing something wrong and without somebody knowing it, like they did with the Republican candidate 4 years ago when they had that tape about 50% of the country was supported by the government. They have enough on Hillary.
That was the 47%
Romney.
For Romney.
Yeah.
Okay, we're out of time. So this is Dan Perkins.
And Don Mazzella.
And remember, if it's important to you, it's important to us. Thanks for listening, and good night.